In sicer bo prvo predavanje Expected Human Longevity avtorjev tukaj navedenih, Beno Šircelj, verjetno ne, da ste pa poročali.
Yeah.
Da kar začnemo.
Hi, my name is Beno Šircelj and I'll be presenting a paper on expected human longevity. First, let's look at some history. So all the civilizations that ever existed went extinct. The Maya civilization went extinct by climate change, drought, and social disorder. Minoans were wiped out by a tsunami. Roman Empire had problems with barbarian invasions, overpopulation, and epidemics. And Native Americans went extinct when Europeans started colonizing and brought diseases and such. So if you look our current civilization, or humans, we still can go extinct. Here are some examples. By like a nuclear holocaust, there will be an all-out war with nuclear weapons. There could be a nuclear winter, and all life could perish. There could be ever-increasing global warming with more and more hot weather, so we could go extinct. Or there could be an artificial intelligence that decides that it no longer needs us and exterminates us. There could be a pandemic, like a virus that spread through the whole world. We could be hit by an asteroid or a comet. Or there could be some nanotechnology, like some self-replicating nanobots that could wipe out the life from the Earth. So our calculation of our longevity are based on the Drake equation. This is the equation proposed by Drake in 1961, and it calculates the number of civilizations in our galaxy. And it has 7 parameters that, when multiplied together, they give us the number of the expected civilization. So let's look at the parameters. The first one is the rate of star formation. The next one is the rate of those stars that have planets. The next one is the number of those planets that actually can support life. The next one is the fraction of those planets on which life actually appears. The next one is the fraction of those that develop intelligence. And the next one is fraction of those that develop technology great enough to be able to send signals in outer space so we can detect them. And the last parameter is the longevity of such civilization. So this is just an equation, and we can solve for L. So if we estimate all the other parameters, including the number of civilizations, we can get an estimate of how long such a civilization can live. So there are some problems with the equation. A lot of the parameters are not well known, especially the life parameter. We don't really know what is the probability that a life will emerge on a planet. There are few parameters at the beginning, like astrophysical. We know pretty good from our observations, like the rate of star formation, number of planets and stuff. And this is also based the Fermi paradox that says that why there are no aliens. So how we estimate the parameters, we did based on a paper by Sandberg and he et al. And he didn't use point values, but he used probability distributions for each of the parameters, taking some range. So for example, rate of star formations is 1 to 100. And the life, which is the most unknown one, is kind of a really small values that go into the range of 10 to the powers minus 50 to 1. The parameter that we estimated is the n, which is the number of civilizations. And we got this estimate by taking our whole galaxy. And if there would be more than 10,000 civilizations uniformly distributed throughout the whole galaxy, we would probably detect at least one in our solar neighborhood. Because we know that for the closest 3,000 or something stars, we didn't detect any signals yet. The next sections will be about results and will be presented by a colleague, Gams.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. A nice welcome from me as well. I'm actually the head of the department. For you that you don't know me, many of you are familiar with me. But for you that you don't know me, I'm head of the department. I also trying to coordinate this research. I'm also national counselor and I lobby for science. And there is a good news. This year next year actually, we're going to get more funds. So the time in Parliament was not a total waste. Okay. But now we go to the substance. Before I go, the question is, why are we listening to this paper at the cognitive conference? What's that related to cognitive issues, cognitive science? And we have actually three entities. One is one single individual human. And there is, let's say, a country or a society like European society, and there is human society. And I still remember when I was a child, and I suddenly realized that I'm going to die. It was very painful. I didn't like it. I needed several days, to come with that term. I'm not sure if you all remember how that happened, but it's not a pleasant, and you have to be old enough. When you're not old enough and you're not mature enough, you're not capable of even understanding that issue. And when I talk to people, it seems that several people, or even most of the people, they don't understand that European Union is going to die sometime, and also that the human civilization is going to die out. So it's a matter of cognitive self-reference, whether we as individual, as country, Slovenia, as society, human civilization, are able to understand what's going on. And it seems that we are still pretty immature because we are coping with this issue like a child is. Okay? And knowing that we are going to die, it's actually beneficial because then you spend more time to being a better person, to work better, to work harder, I don't know, to be more positive guy. I think that's for most of the people, I hope. And it's the same for this civilization. There are two issues. If we know we are going to die out, but we don't know when, we have to find out which are the dangers and then to cope with that dangers as well. So this is the overall picture. And here are the results. They are in the logarithmic scale, so they are pretty difficult to understand. So there is the n. N is the number of civilizations, and L is the longevity of the human civilization. But linearly, it's pretty easy because all curves are of this kind. So it's something like this, maybe up, down this curve, but it always goes something like this down. And now we're going to take a quick look at these numbers. I'm not sure about time, whether we can do that. But if you look at this number and you see, for example, these two numbers here. So you see here number 13,000 years, here 2,000 years, here 11,000 years, 10,000 years. So this is some turning point. And if we would have time to read it, and of course you can read it in a paper, you would see that roughly it's about 1,000 or 10,000 years that most likely we're going to live. Okay. We can live further on, even for millions of years, but to reach that, we have to be very, very smart. I think that in my estimate, because I've been studying this for quite some time, we humans are not smart enough to reach that period without the help of new tools. And that tool is, in my opinion, the best tool is superintelligence. So very advanced AI. And I'm afraid that we humans, and not only politicians, but overall as a society, it will be very hard for us to reach those prolonged times. But it is possible, okay? And we know about some rules of the times in which direction should we go and which direction should we avoid, okay? First issue is, of course, that we are aware that civilization is going to end sometime. There are dangers, okay? Like an individual can get, I don't know, you can get drugs and you get involved in drugs, pleasure, and maybe you die in a couple of years. So you have choices to make. And we as civilization are maturing and we have choices to make. Several of these choices are highly cognitive, self-referencing, and that's why we are presenting it here. Thank you.
Some questions?
Here is the number of civilizations. We start with 1 because we know there is at least 1. It's us. Okay. Then can be 10, 100,000, or 10,000. It is very unlikely that there are more than 10,000 because if spread uniformly, then we should already observe them because we get signals from all the universe. We are listening to for the alien civilizations for, let's say, 50 years, and we haven't got anything so far. We get more and more advanced methods, but there's still nothing. And in my opinion, it's more likely that we are somewhere here. So, but it's you can't know because you can't see the whole galaxy. And that's why we go to the numbers that are still possible, but not very likely. So in my opinion, it should be most probable that we are something here. It's also probable that we are the first and the only one, but possibility is that close to 0. It's much more likely that there were several civilizations before and they died out. Yeah. Yeah, the catch is that if there was some civilization before, for example, in far in our galaxy, and they would spread to the other systems or planet systems or stars, then sooner you can see that the universe is old enough that it would be overcrowded already. So there is something wrong with this way of thinking. Either it's very hard that smart people emerge. That's one possibility, and the second possibility is that civilizations die out. And I'm afraid that the second one seems to me more likely than the first one.
When he says civilization, he means civilization we can detect.
Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I have one question. You're talking about the tool of superintelligence. And my question is just that what about the existential risk that, for example, Nick Bostrom talks about and fears? Some of the people fear superintelligence to be the greatest threat to humanity. You have this control problem, and I don't know if you know, but I won't be describing the thought experiment Rocco's Basilisk. It's famous internet forum thought experiments that people got crazy about because it somehow shows that even if you somehow program the superintelligence to be very beneficial to humans, you end up with some unforeseen consequences that are quite... So basically, what about the existential threat that some of the thinkers are pointing out?
Thank you. This is another reason why this is related to the cognitive sciences. So how do we relate, how do we find superintelligence? Is it a danger, is it a possibility? But it's like with any other strong technology. Any strong technology is providing beneficial issues, beneficial stuff to the human civilization, but at the same time it's danger that there will be something wrong. It's the same with AI. AI is as strong as, let's say, atomic bombs, in my opinion, and in the opinion of several other people. So it is dangerous. But then we can study under which condition is it dangerous. And it turns out that the conditions are pretty simple to eliminate. So if you eliminate the necessary conditions that it becomes dangerous, and if you look at the book, there are already some written there, and there have been several others propagated through the AI ethics, through these policies, how to deal with AI systems. So this is one issue, how to make them safe. And the other issue is how to make it progress, how to really make smart superintelligence. There are lots of sub-issues like general intelligence and other issues. So on the one side, we have to create this new, strong, dangerous technology. On the second side, we have to be careful not to become really dangerous.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So our next speaker will be Duška Meh. She wrote a paper together with Dan Georgiev and Nicole Meh. And the title will be Artificial Intelligence in the Main, Promising Future.
Smem dati mikrofon?
Da, prosim.
Ja.
Dober dan. Predstavili bi radi naše videnje, kako lahko umetna inteligenca pomaga pri izzivu obvladovanje bolečine. Gre namreč delovanje današnje družbe je v veliki meri povezano z informacijami. In število informacij se eksponencialno veča. Mi vemo, da je podatkov ogromno, ampak se niti ne zavedamo, kako v bistvu smo odvisni od njih. Ker zaenkrat vemo, da se veča zelo veliko, da potrebujemo ogromno znanja, sposobnosti, da obvladamo informacije, ki jih dobimo. In predvidevajo, da bo za leto 2020, da se bo število informacij podvojilo vsakih 73 dni. Obvladati takšno število informacij in jih smiselno uporabiti je v bistvu za naše sposobnosti skoraj nemogoče. Zato, ker sicer lahko dobimo ogromno podatkov, vsi imamo več ali manj ogromno pripomočkov elektronskih, s katerimi si lahko pomagamo z znanjem, ki je nakopičeno, ampak kljub temu, da nam pomagajo vse tablice pa mobilni telefoni, nam znajo pomagati poiskati podatke, ampak kljub temu smo jih mi sposobni vsako sekundo sprejeti le 10⁹ bitov v sekundi, zavestno pa jih lahko obdelamo 100 v sekundi. In sicer bomo najbrž mlajši kolegi boste razočarani, ampak kljub temu, da znate operirati z ogromno podatki, ki vam jih nudijo pripomočki, še vedno jih ne obvladate prav nič več kot pa tisti, ki smo jih v glavnem nabirali iz knjig. Podatki, ki so za človeka najpomembnejši, so zdravstveni podatki. In velik del teh podatkov je povezan z bolečino. Bolečina je pa občutek, ki se ga večinoma sploh ne zavedamo, ampak je povezana z našim preživetjem. Zaradi tega, ker je opozorilo. Večinoma se sploh ne zavedamo, da je bolečina lahko pomembna. Občutimo jo vsi in je to tako mimogrede nepomembna za vse nas, lahko pa se zgodi, da postane tudi središče našega življenja, kar se zgodi pri ljudeh, ki so obremenjeni s posebno obliko bolečine, ki jo imenujemo kronična bolečina, ki lahko povzroči ogromno trpljenja in si v bistvu ne znamo življenja predstavljati več brez tega, da nas nekdo nauči, kako živeti s tem. Torej, to je eden od zdravstvenih podatkov, ampak torej, kot sem rekla, je bolečino na srečo občutimo skoraj vsi. Da je tako pomembna, opazimo pri ljudeh, ki so ali prirojeno ali za kakršnihkoli drugih okvar ne čutijo bolečine in dobijo ogromno poškodb in tudi preživetje je ogroženo, če nimamo teh podatkov, ne dobimo. Je pa obvladovanje bolečine en velik izziv, s katerim se pa spopadamo že zelo dolgo. Zato, ker je bolečina tako pomembna, opazimo iz tega, da imamo o njej ogromno podatkov, ogromno je knjig, člankov, drugih zapisov, ki govorijo, opisujejo ta pojav neprijeten. V letih 2000, na prelomu stoletja, ko sem se začela ukvarjati z bolečino, je o njej postajala knjiga Textbook of Pain. To je bila ena redkih, ki se jo je dalo dobiti in sem jo je bila ena prvih, ki jo je imela in se je ukvarjala z njo. Potem je bilo nekaj člankov v reviji Pain in pa še nekaterih drugih, medtem ko pa drugih podatkov praktično se ni dalo dobiti. Danes je število knjig, drugih zapisov, do katerih lahko pristopamo, neobvladljivo in se človek težko znajde z vsemi podatki in izluščiti iz njih najpomembnejše. Ogromno je tudi raziskav, ki potekajo na različnih delih sveta. In slediti tem raziskavam in jih uporabiti pri obvladovanju bolečine je skoraj nemogoče. Po drugi strani so ljudje, ki živijo z bolečino oziroma trpijo z njo, imajo lahko kilograme dokumentacije, ki jo nosijo za sabo ali je v raznih zdravstvenih domovih. Podobno so pa tudi ljudje, pri katerih bolečine ne prepoznamo in trpijo za nekaj, zaradi težave, ki jo pravzaprav zdravstvo ne prepozna. Kako je obvladati? Obvladati jo je zelo težko, obstaja veliko klasičnih načinov, ki jih prepoznamo in zelo slabo delujejo. Zdaj najpogosteje so zapisi, različni obliki, potem raziskave in pa še vedno več podatkov, ki so pa večinoma biološki. Bolečina pa ni enodimenzionalni pojav. Medicina res upošteva predvsem biološke dejavnike. V resnici pa je bolečina, ki je večdimenzionalni pojav, zahteva več. In naš pristop je drugačen. Zavedamo se, da je bolečina pojav, pri katerem je ogromno dejavnikov in na srečno smo skupina, ki je sestavljena iz predstavnikov različnih disciplin in vsak po svoje pristopa do tega problema. In torej, kot sem že omenila, upoštevamo predvsem, da v bolečini lahko upravičeno in poroča samo človek, ki bolečino doživlja in jo dojema. Zdaj, težko jo je obvladati. Sploh tega ne more posameznik, in ker si želimo, da bi bilo tega čim več, da bi bilo čim lažje, uporabljamo seveda sodobno tehnologijo in sicer računalniške modele, ki ki simulirajo delovanje človekovih kognitivnih sistemov. Torej, naša skupina že od vsega začetka je sestavljena iz, kot sem že omenila, predstavnikov različnih strok, predvsem zaradi tega, ker je so podatki, ki jih moramo obvladati, zelo različni, število in pristopi so zelo različni. Zdaj, tisto, kar smo mi uspeli, da smo zbrali podatke in pripravili diagnostično pot, na osnovi katere lahko pri bolnikih, ki imajo motnje občutljivosti, dokaj zanesljivo postavimo diagnozo. Lahko nekateri menijo, da je naš pristop samo teoretični, kar pa ne drži, ker imamo natančno določeno skupino pacientov in preizkusili smo pa te naše ugotovitve tudi na drugi skupini, vendar pa nismo dovolj potrdili. Predvsem zaradi tega, ker zaenkrat nimamo dostopa do velikega števila pacientov, na katerih bi našo hipotezo lahko poizkusili in jo potem tudi implementirali. Poleg tega ne poznamo, nimamo dovolj pomoči, potrebovali bi namreč nekoga, ki bi razvil kognitivno, ne znam prav, to bi Metod bolje povedal, ki nam bi postavil sistem, da bi nam kognitivna inteligenca lahko pomagala, in zaradi tega upamo, da bomo lahko, ko bomo vsaj nekoliko jasneje predstavili in pa na širše, pa da nas bo nekdo slišal, da nam bo pomagal predvsem pri naboru dovoljšnega števila pacientov in pa pri izkušanju našega modela ter implementaciji pri večjem številu diagnoz. Hvala.
Vprašanje? Sugestija kolegov? Ni? Če ni, potem hvala lepa.
Hvala za sodelovanje.
Hvala tudi.
Ja, lahko na trakec ti dam.
Ja.
Super. Hvala, to pa se že obdaš kaj. Izvolite.
A boste pokazali 2 minute, ko bo?
3 minute.
Aha, okej.
Prav, naša naslednja govornica je Izabela But, ki bo predstavila prispevek Consequences of Relationships with Robots in Our Everyday Lives.
Hello, my name is Isabella and I'm a master student of cognitive science. My main topic of interest is relationship between human and robots. But today the main part of the talk will be about my pilot study, and after that I will quickly point out some of the ethically problematic consequences of named relationship. We all know and see that the robots are already infiltrating our everyday lives, and although the scientists are developing them in goodwill to make our lives better and easier, there are some bad, ethically questionable consequences. So my pilot study is the result of my study can't be generalized on the whole population of the elderly because the sample was too small and not representative. In first group, I have 4 women aged over 80 years old, and they all had accomplished university level education. In the second group, I had 4 women aged between 70 and 80 years old, and they had accomplished only primary school. The first hypothesis was that the elderly are not open to novelties, and the second one was made after I realized that I had in first group highly educated participants. And the hypothesis is highly educated participants will be more open-minded for novelties and will consider them more critically than the ones with the lower education. So the research looked like we watched clips from portal YouTube, and we discussed the shown relationship between human and robots in different settings. First, we watched relationship between robot and human in factory. They all said that it is a really nice improvement that robots are taking place in factory, because it releases humans from heavy work. Though they expressed concern about people who are left without jobs over the robots. Then we watched relationship between human and robot in our homes. So the robot took place of a companion. Participants in first group were all against such idea. The participants in second group, 3 of them were widows, and they said that it would be really nice to have someone or something that would keep them company and talk with them when they felt lonely. The next robot was actually outer skeleton, used in a rehabilitation process after a stroke. They were all keen to have such robot, and after that I asked them also about surgeon robot, and they said that it is I mean, they wouldn't choose robot surgeon over human surgeon, because they are afraid how would robot react in a critical situation. After we finished watching the clips, I asked them about general impression of robots. They all seemed like they acknowledged the fact that robots are already part of our everyday lives, though they expressed concern about lacking the human factor in robots. For example, they don't believe humans would take place of a friend or a partner in our everyday lives. And considering the hypothesis, I think all participants were quite open to novelties such as robots. And for the second hypothesis, I think I can confirm it, because in first group they were more critical and open to robots in different settings. Okay, every relationship has at least 2 parties. In this case, we have humans and we have robots. And the psychological characteristics of humans are they have ability to empathize, they have emotions, and the ability to anthropomorphize. This means that they can see non-living objects as living. And characteristics that are in robots are level of autonomy and a way of communication. I would point these 2 out because I think these are most important, but there are also looks and behavior. And these characteristics I think are important because I think they influence the relationship. And out of this relationship, as I said, we can get ethically problematic consequences that are depending on characteristics I named before. For example, because humans have emotions and empathy, they can form an emotional bond with others, in this case with non-living objects, with robots. And in this kind of relationship, for now, there is no reciprocity in these emotions, in respect, in wanting to belong, which I think is in itself a bad thing. Also, people who are buying robots in believing that these robots will give them back feelings are being deceived. And this is also one thing I think we can prevent if a factory and who are selling those robots inform the buyer that for now robot is not actually feeling any feelings. Then about manipulation. If a human starts to trust his robot, forms emotional bond, this robot can take advantage of this and start to and tell its owner that he or she should buy some other product from this factory. And losing patience towards other humans, I think it's quite problematic because when we are in a relationship with a robot, the robot is made this way to suit our needs and agree with us. And on the other hand, relationship with human, we have to compromise. We have to work hard to any kind of relationship works. And if humans will get used of not compromising and not having to work for a relationship, the patience will degrade, and I think the value of human relationship will degrade. Okay, I will quickly wrap it up now. Thank you for your attention, and I think it's time for your questions now and comments.
Okay, questions? Yep.
So can you go to the slide with the hypothesis? So how did you define open to novelties? Wow, how did you, so you had answers from the participants, but how did you delineate being open to novelties or not being open to novelties?
I think if you're not open to novelties, you reject it immediately. Okay. But all the participants here didn't reject any idea in the first place. After the discussion, they were like, okay, I don't agree with it, or I do agree.
Okay, so the second question is also connected to this slide and what you said now. So you said that from one group, 3/4 of the participants were widows.
Yes.
How do you know that this was not the influencing factor for the second hypothesis? And
It
that
was.
It was education. But you said that.
Yeah, okay.
So how do you know that the highly educated participants were more open-minded and critical because they are highly educated,
yeah,
and not because they are widows?
Yeah, I mean they are not widows.
Or the opposite. So how do you know that in the second group, where there are 3 widows, that this was not the deciding factor for the second hypothesis and not primary school?
They were also widows. They were also
Oh, so there were 3
okay.
widows.
They were widows on both widows.
Ah, okay, because I understood
Yeah,
that they were.
she said she just pointed out.
Ah, okay, so they were controlled for. This was controlled
Yeah.
for. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I didn't get that. Cool. Yeah, thanks.
In UK and USA, they have the most robots, the most AI and so forth, and they have the lowest unemployment rate in, say, 50 years, I don't know exactly. But in your presentation, there was some issue related to the more robots you have, the more unemployment you have, which does not seem to be confirmed with real data.
Well, I didn't want to say that because of the higher number of robots, there is a higher level of unemployment.
There was some statement like this.
That's a worry, right?
That was a concern.
Yeah.
It was a concern, okay.
Yeah.
But that concern was not necessarily supported by real data. The real data shows quite the opposite. the more robots you have, the lower unemployment. Okay.
Okay, I will fix it. Thank you.
One question about open to novelties. If the novelties are dependent on education, there will be a problem. As novelty, how is this cases, what is novelty presented to higher educated and to primary school educated? Are these the same novelties for both groups, or
Yeah.
they are adjusted to
With novelties,
the level of the education?
with novelties, I had in mind robots we watched on clips.
But the robots could be not novelty for educated, not so novelty for educated.
Before I started the interview, I asked them what are their prior experience with the new technology, and I saw that all of the participants did came to in contact with, for example, computer, and almost all of them had their cell phone. So I expected that their level of familiarity with the robots and novelties I want to investigate approximately the same.
Okay then, thank you.
Thank you.
Ti ne boš snimal. Ne. Zdaj njega ne snimal. Okay?